Well, it doesn't look like the entire college football season was canceled during the last commercial break. There's a little relief, right? Connor O'Gara will be writing about whatever happens today, and I'm sure he already is writing about it. Saturday Down South.
He brings the truth to us.
Connor, you having fun today?
Today started 36 hours ago.
Yeah.
This has been, I was one of those suckers who went to bed at 10:30 last night, and I woke up at sick brag, woke up at 6:15, got a morning run in, and woke up to see, oh, by the way, one of the most revolutionary things we've ever seen from college athletes happened while you were sleeping. Just the latest on all things college football, no big deal.
Yeah, and here it was. I thought that we might talk about how badly Arkansas got screwed by the SEC schedule and how Alabama and Georgia were aided and all of that stuff. And none of it really seems to matter right now because who knows? From some of the reports we're seeing, and it's all rumors right now, who knows what to believe. Arkansas could end up playing against Michigan or Ohio State maybe. I don't know what to believe right now, and my head's on a swivel.
I have no idea. I was doing a radio interview right before this, and during that time, we get Big Ten spokesman says no vote has been held by our presidents and chancellors, and now they're reportedly voting tonight. It's all right, well, what happened to all those reports about the 12-2 vote that had Iowa and Nebraska in favor of a season, everyone else against it? This whole thing has smelled so fishy from the Big Ten standpoint. From the top down, I think Kevin Warren has really looked like an inexperienced Power 5 commissioner. Go back to when they first came out with the 10-game conference schedule, and I was in favor of the way in which it was done because it was going to give the Big Ten flexibility, and you see the others follow suit and all that. And I think from that standpoint, it made sense. But we probably should have known back then that when all these other Power 5 commissioners came out and said, we've been meeting every day for months, and you just did this without any of our knowledge whatsoever, that was probably a sign that Kevin Warren wasn't really going to weigh in on the feelings of others. And now, ironically enough, it came out over the weekend that the Big Ten was going to cancel its season, and that it was waiting for another Power 5 conference to be able to cancel with it. When it's now you want unity, now you want to be able to kind of have this united front. It's been ridiculous from a communication standpoint, and the fact that the timing is just so backwards to go from announcing a conference schedule and then 4 days later, after not seeing any of these protocols that were put in place that you spent countless hours putting together, to be we're just going to move the season to the spring. It's messed up on a variety of levels, and that's probably why we have so many moving parts still.
Why is the Big Ten the way that it is? They were the first to cancel I think the major basketball tournaments. I'm not counting the Ivy League there, but there is to me there feels like a little bit of a line you can draw between Ivy League and Big Ten. It's like the Big Ten views itself like a public university version almost of the Ivy League, and the Pac-12 acts like their little brother. And you really have this thing where it's like the Pac-12 and the Big Ten versus a different ethos of college sports and college football in the Big 12, SEC, and ACC, in which the SEC is like the older, bigger, bullyish sort of brother. But it's like the two leagues, Pac-12, Big 10, SEC, ACC, Big 12. It's like they're going up against each other.
And this is the system that's been created, and this is just another reminder that the NCAA doesn't have any power, and this is all about the Power 5 conferences. And I do think, though, that this is in part because not having Jim Delaney in this position, and my brother wrote about this for our Big Ten site, Saturday Tradition, in that this is something that I think Jim Delaney would have avoided. He would have avoided getting to this point. He would have avoided the mishaps in communication that have been had. Why is it leaking over the weekend that Kevin Warren favors a spring season? How is that leaking unless he wants that out there and he's pushing back against some of this player movement to try and sort of threaten them in a way to say, hey, look, if you guys don't comply and just go with the rules that we've already put in place, we're going to move the season to the spring. It's very weird on a variety of levels, and I think Jim Delaney, given his business savvy, would have handled this completely different. And I think that he would have looked at this situation and saw, hey, look, if we make a decision of this magnitude, there are so many other things that impact that. And if we are going to be the first conference to do this and the first conference to do that, you have to consider all these other possibilities. They're still trying to figure out what they would do if they did cancel the season, and all these players, like what would happen to them from a safety standpoint in terms of not having the regular testing. And that was the great point that Trevor Lawrence brought up during that Twitter thread that he released last night. I just think that there's been a little bit of a short-sightedness about the Big Ten, and I don't necessarily think it would have been there had Jim Delaney still been in this role.
Speaking of Connor O'Gara here on Halftime, guys, I'll give you this to chew on, and this is just a rumor. This is nothing. Sorry, but this comes from Clay Travis. He says, apparently Ohio State players and coaches now asking if they can play in the SEC this season. So take that for what you will. But I'll relay that into this question here for you, Connor. I mean, say there is a scenario where the Big Ten cancels football outright, could there be a scenario where, say, just take that statement, for example, that colleges may try to do what Notre Dame did and join the ACC or come to the SEC Big 12 just to try to get some semblance of a football season in?
Man, the ramifications of that are massive, absolutely massive. That would take NCAA involvement. And the frustrating thing is that they have set this precedent where they have granted all this immediate eligibility. And I'm of the belief that all these players should have been able to have immediate eligibility. But now what the situation creates is a scenario in which all of these kids could gut their programs. I mean, that was why they had the whole they moved the immediate eligibility thing with the transfers to next year, because they were worried about what about if the Pac-12 decides that they're not going to have football this year, and then all the players for USC leave and go to the SEC. Why is USC all of a sudden just without a program because they don't have a season? But that's what they're staring down if you have certain Power 5 commissioners or certain Power 5 conferences that are able to play and others aren't. And that's why Kevin Warren wants to be able to get everybody on board with his idea. Meanwhile, you've got Greg Sankey on the opposite side no, we're standing firm. This is why we put in the date for September 26th start. We wanted to be able to see these protocols through. We wanted to see if there were going to be rising cases and figure out the best possible way to deal with this when students come back on campus. And instead, the Big Ten, with its expedited schedule, is looking at a much different set of circumstances right now. And I think that's the frustrating thing, is that there's been such a divide with these Power 5 commissioners that they haven't necessarily worked together in the way that they should have been from the start. And instead now it's a lack of leadership, and we're seeing what can happen when these Power 5 leagues are left to do their own thing. And it's creating a mess that is bigger than they probably even realize at this point.
I think we started off the show and I made a statement. I think you'll probably agree with me, but if they did come out and say Big Ten, Pac-12's done, does that necessarily put the death nail in SEC football? Or do you think obviously the pressure will be put back on the SEC to either cancel or stand firm with what they think, but just because the Big Ten could come out today and say, you know what, screw it, we're done, doesn't necessarily put the SEC in jeopardy.
No, and I think that I read the report from AL.com as well that the SEC is going to try and stand pat, and it's going to try and play this tug of war and try and get the Big 12 and ACC on board with this idea of still trying to have a season. And even if that means not having a true national champion this year, and if it's just conference championships or just the SEC is trying to function by itself and have only a conference champion, I think that they would be open to that idea. And based on the quote that you saw from Paul Feinbaum, where he said the SEC is really steadfast on trying to make this work. Now, if the SEC is willing to stand there and be the last conference to cancel and still have a season while 4 other Power 5 conferences shut it down, optics-wise, probably not the best look. There's a lot of moving pieces with that as well, and what would potentially happen if you were to deal with complications of this affecting rosters and all that different stuff. It's a mess. Every way you draw it up, it is an absolute mess right there. I would not want to be one of these decision makers, and I do think that we're going to see in the next 2 days here so many things happen that this conversation right now is probably going to feel very much a long time ago, just like we were talking about earlier with the Arkansas schedule.
You brought up the communication aspect earlier, just kind of the lack between ADs and commissioners of school presidents and different things like that. But when you look at the SEC, or just the way it seems to me, I feel like the SEC's killed it in that department as far as speaking with ADs and commissioners and ADs to coaches to players, the communication from the SEC, in my opinion, seems like it's been stellar to this point. You agree with that?
To a certain extent. I mean, I think the schedule release was a mess in terms of communication and them not being able to get on the same page clearly. Like, that's not the type of thing that is supposed to come out at 6 p.m. on a Friday night with 2 hours of notice. There's just no way that that's the way that they drew it up initially. And I think that communication was definitely botched. But I do think that the SEC and what it's done is it's been willing to come out and say, like, Greg Sankey is looking at other leagues. He's doing this, this, and this. These are the protocols in place. They laid out all of their policies in terms of the testing, 6 days in advance, 3 days in advance, and then the third-party testing as well. Coaches got to be wearing masks. They have come out with that in a way that players can actually see, all right, this is what's expected of us. And based on the conversations that I've had, there has been a better line of communication with players being able to say, hey, we want to be able to feel safe. This is what we think needs to be done with all of that. So I think that's the good news. And you saw the Washington Post story even a couple weeks ago where player representatives were allowed to join in on that call with medical officials, Greg Sankey, Power 5 athletic directors. And I think that that's something that we need to see a lot more of. There needs to be a lot more communication. The SEC has done, I think, okay in that, and it still can be improved.
Connor, when you look at the graphic that was shared by all the college football players over the weekend, this hashtag We Are United, the thing that really stands out for me, and it's more about the future of college football than the present, the words ultimately create a college football players association representative of the players of all Power 5 conferences. And whether it's a real union or not, just some sort of an association, this to me is a paradigm shift in the industry of college football. And I don't think that it's something that can be stopped either. I
agree. I think that regardless if we have a college football season this year, what those players did by getting together, joining on a Zoom call, spending 45 minutes, hashing out what exactly they want, not kind of going all over the place in the way that the Pac-12 did, which I read that Players Tribune statement, and it almost felt like a little bit of a shoot-your-shot sort of deal where they were just trying to get all of these things. They're like, we want half the revenues and blah, blah, blah. And maybe they went a little bit too big. And I think simplifying it, but at the same time getting more momentum on board made this such a more powerful movement. I mean, at 9:30 a.m., this already had 91,000 tweets, the We Want to Play movement. And that's an incredible thing to watch unfold. And I think if you're hopeful for the future generation, something like that is what you would point to. And I think that there will be situations in which we'll look back on that as a seminal moment to say college football progress happened because of what these players were willing to do. Players who are going to become millionaires in due time, whether there's college football or not, and the measures that they were willing to take in order to try and have a season and to ensure that a lot of these other things that are associated with college football can happen in a safe way. I applaud the efforts of those players and what they were willing to do because they didn't have to, but they realized that it was the necessary move at that moment to try and give some sort of resistance, some clear plan to these decision makers to say, hey, we're laying it all out there. This is exactly what we want. Let's make this happen. And I think that's why so many people were able to get on board with that.
Connor, lots else we could get to, but we'll leave it there, and maybe we'll save some of that stuff for next week. Appreciate you. Keep that head on a swivel, and we'll be reading you at Saturday Down South.
Thanks, man.
Sounds good. Appreciate it, guys.
You got it, Connor O'Gara. Crazy stuff. You know what's really interesting, and maybe to get into in the next segment and further on SmackDown, Arkansas, if the season gets played and this 10-game SEC-only schedule actually does happen, Arkansas has the toughest schedule in the history of the sport. Okay? I think that's easy to glean from looking at this schedule. But who were the first combination of athletic director and head coach to tweet support of We Want to Play?
You're daggum right.
Even with the possibility, as remote as it might be, an 0-10 season, Coach Pittman, Hunter Yurachek want their boys out there, and the guys want to be out there too. They just want to play. We just want to talk about them playing. We'll do that next.